out in various different languages. This is how we were able to say that prior to the tsunami in that forecast, I was saying 300,000 people dead, and the nation kicked back to a previous age, and we were close on the 300,000. Those times we've used numbers. The 6.3 earthquake in Hawaii in the 50th state. I thought it would be the 50th parallel, but it was the 50th state. The 6.3 came through as 6.3, and then the 50 came through as the word 50. So we actually have the word showing up in 600 as though, excuse me, as though they're going to use that frequently in headlines in various different media. And so it will be at least that. I'm not saying it'll settle there. I mean, it might be 700-800. Who knows? But I know that at least in terms of our forecast, there will be significant presence within the mainstream media that will cause the number 600 to sink into people's heads as being associated with the price of silver and some level of stability. In other words, we'll cross through that number, hover around it, stick close to it, something. So it'll resonate within people's minds, and it's leaked out, and that's where we're at now. Of course, I could be 100% wrong. I mean, we're wrong half the time. Sure doesn't look that way because of the situation developing, but we'll see here in the near-term future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, you're quite welcome. 888-663-6386. We put you on hold. We'll pick it up live on the air. Clif, and something like silver, which is fascinating. We know that, of course, the boys are selling it short. J.P. Morgan, the biggest.
Goldman Sachs. Guys.
Big time. And there is some class action lawsuits that may actually yield some results, believe it or not, to stop them or to slow them down. Now.
Oh, I don't put much faith in the result of trying to get justice out of a corrupt court system.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but there are.
It may surprise us. The universe may surprise us.
Yeah, it may surprise. So I guess my question is this: if in fact that were going to be the case, would people involved in that, the J.P. Morgan people and other people, you would be able to pick up on that, and would that be part of a $600 prediction somehow? You know what I'm asking? In other words, is your technology cool enough to tie all this stuff together? People start talking about that linguistically?
Sure. Okay. Now that part it is.
It is.
If we were to get for instance, we have entities that are related to labels. A label might be Goldman Sachs because they're a big player.
Sure.
Okay, and also bear in mind we started off with the goal of using the technology to monkey around with the stock market, and I got distracted and never went there. But it was designed to deal with commercial and financial kinds of transactions, so it's relatively good about that. So we do see that kind of thing. However, that's not the case with the $600 silver. The $600 silver also, you also have to bear in mind that I don't take the results of the data and my interpretation of them without trying to fit them into a realistic model of the world. My realistic model of the world, I do things like resource analysis occasionally, probably once every 18 months now because I'm a little too busy. I used to do it once every year. And I'd take a month or so and I would go through and do this Buckminster-Fuller style resource analysis of all of the different things on the planet. And if you do that, you discover some remarkable things. China is about now probably 1/5 of the way through its national electrification process. Okay? The electrification process that they've been using so far, they've hit an area where they've been primarily dealing with copper. They're about to enter into that phase that's going to demand a lot of silver and gold, less gold than silver, but vast quantities of silver. Unfortunately, silver is a commercial industrial metal besides being a precious metal. So you always used to be a precious metal, and then we discovered all these cool uses for it, and we've been consuming it, vast quantities of it. So we've consumed more ounces of silver than exist above ground now. And there are not enough, if we were to allow China to have the same electrification process that we enjoyed here in the U.S. over these past 100 years, but specifically the last 40 years, and China were to do it, it would take 5 times the amount of silver that's available at this point on above ground.
Wow.
So we know that we're at a deficit there. We also have a situation where we know that the U.S. and other U.S. more than anybody else, but in the developed world, but we're also almost at the same level as China in the sense that our electrical system is so old that it's going to demand major re-inputs, and we're going to have to re-electrify this nation if we survive into, say, 2015 as a national entity, and we're going to have to get real serious about it. Now, in either case, either of our nations would consume all of the silver that's available at this point on the planet, and there wouldn't be any more. So all of those people that are holding silver, we're going to have to be given something of greater value in order to give it up. So you can see how the pressure on silver as a commodity is going to, as an industrial commodity, is going to seriously impact its value holding as a precious metal. And we actually have data from way back in the early part of the process that suggested that silver would cross parity with gold.
Wow. And maybe if you're correct in your analysis about the actual physical shortage of silver, maybe that would be the precipitating factor where the Goldman Sachs and the J.P. Morgans couldn't continue to do as much of what they do as far as selling it short?
Yeah, the whole selling it short is an abstraction laid upon an illusion, but I would agree that it would be something external to the legal system that would cause the whole situation to crash, and it's probably crashing as we speak.
Chances of, as you say, the chances of the judges going along with, because they own the judges, right?
Correct, yeah. So the judge will do what they're told to do by their boss. It's just the way it works. Obama does what he's told by his boss. It's just the way it works.
Okay, we have we have lots of questions here, but we have several questions on the stock market. This is one that's kind of indicative. Clif, I have a sneaking suspicion that the rally we have seen in stocks is a direct result of manipulation, i.e. buying individual stocks and indexes by the plunge protection team. Well,
okay.
you may be onto something. In your linguistics, as part of the market collapse, does this manipulation become apparent to the average person?
We have a situation, it becomes open and exposed. The apparent to the average person stuff, I just don't know. In our linguistics, it suggests that we do reach a point where the stock market and people associated with it are held in disrepute. They're held with the same esteem as criminals, but and where there's in essence a wholesale abandonment of it, but doesn't make any kind of a permanent impact on the average guy. Our data doesn't go there because the average guy is not involved in the stock market. They're not really interacting with it, and it doesn't form that much of a percentage of their day, so to speak.
Let's see. Another question from Lucas on the stock market. How about the coming stock market collapse he forecasts? Does he have any idea on how it will go during these fall months? Will it affect the stock market or just the U.S. dollar currency?
That's the whole thing. I can't tell. Our language for the market, as I've always maintained with George, doesn't necessarily show a crash per se. It may be a giant melt up, in the sense that I've always jokingly told George, before the market becomes irrelevant, we might well hit Dow 20,000. It doesn't appear that now, but if we get the kind of currency collapse in terms of value, one of the expected side effects would be an escalation in nominative prices on things like the stock market and other illusions. So indeed, we may see a situation where they devalue the dollar, but everybody is suddenly, at least insofar as the Wall Street guys, is out there touting, Dow 20,000 because it's rocketing up. Well, it's rocketing up because the dollar is worth far less.
So when you're talking about devaluing the dollar, are you suggesting an actual change in the zeros, just adding a zero one day?
No, it won't come that way. It won't come that way. It's already coming extremely slowly, in the sense that you go to your local farmer's market out here, and you see a large organic tomato, and you look at it all weighed out, and it's $6 for a tomato. Well, you know the tomato is not really worth any more than the tomato was last year, but the dollar is worth a whole lot less because it takes a lot more of them.
You don't need to change the currency to do that.
Correct.
Just print more money.
Correct, and so we're going to get that form of hyperinflation. And
Right.
what I actually suspect will occur will be hyperinflation in the form of escalating food prices, and they do it sneaky because on the manufacturing and the corporate side, they make the packages smaller or the stuff inside way less, but the package stays the same and so on. And so they're devaluing the dollar continuously around you in all of these various little forms. I suspect, however, that we're going to get to that we are very close to a crisis, and that crisis is going to cause the officialdom to have to do something relative to the official value of the dollar that will cause it to be that much more apparent.
Why would, if they do this slow, steady stealing, kind of eating out our substance, as the founding father said, which is what they're doing, right? Why would they allow some kind of a crisis point? I mean, if it's just a slow, steady eating away at the dollar, why can't they just continue with that until they may never catch on. We may never catch on.
Sure, and it is their hope that we would never catch on, or that not enough of us would catch on.
What do you think would happen would make us catch on to a point where a tipping point, and say there'd be so many ahas that something would happen, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, it's an exogenous effect. Okay,
yeah.
let's look at it's how reality works. It gets back to that vibrational level of things. Okay, in order for reality to exist, the illusion of material world, we have to have change.
Right.
Change occurs through the introduction of time
right.
and movement.
Right.
Well, let's look at some of the time and movement side effects. And let's take a historic example that we know had real impacts, and that was the arising of the dog walking hour in Moscow. In the late 60s and in through the 70s, Russia was was the core of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was a dictatorship, much like we have in the United States today, of the powerful against the powerful elite few against the many. And they controlled everything. And one thing they controlled there in Russia was the state media. Much as we have now, we have corporate media that's controlled. They had state media. 5 individuals made the decision for all of the Russians in terms of what they saw. Here we have 5 individuals making the decisions for all of the Americans and Anglosphere in terms of what we see in the media. This led to a situation where one guy, one day, the national news in Russia would come on because they span 12 time zone. The national news was sort of staggered, and in Moscow they had national news at 9 p.m. And so from 9 p.m. until 10 p.m. every day they had the national news in Russia. And one day this guy in Moscow discovered that the national news was lying to him, and he was just thoroughly disgusted with it. He knew they were telling him a falsehood because he had been involved in the incident, and the details are immaterial because he knew they were lying to him. And so he got disgusted, and he just couldn't watch the news anymore, so he got up and told his wife he was just going to go take the dog for a walk. And so every night, because the news was lying to him, he couldn't stand to be told these lies anymore. He just couldn't wrap his head around why they would lie to him, and it led to all these different thoughts and so on. He would go out and he'd walk his dog and think about it, and probably smoke his Russian cigarettes. And so he's walking the dog in the night at Moscow, and one day it dawns on him to look up from his walking the dog, and he looks around and there's a guy over there walking a dog. There's another guy walking a dog. And pretty soon he discovers that, there's a whole lot of people out here walking dogs from 9 to 10 at night. And it was a side effect of the fact that all these people felt lied to by their national news, and they turned off the national news and went out. And when they